And now, a show with inappropriate language, The Powell Movement.
Welcome to The Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and it's another quarantine episode of the show, which means another long intro about nothing really, because that's what most of us are up to. For me, I work from home as it is, so the working part hasn't been a big issue. Until lately. It's getting to me. While most people feel trapped at home, I feel trapped at work. I mean, I do have a bunch of cartridges for my pen, a lot of beer, food, my Traeger, Xbox, badminton, homeschooling, virtual reality, and dog walks that should keep me somewhat entertained. But even with all that, I'm getting bored and fat. I mean, I started this year with a month of health and weighed in at about 165 pounds in early February. While it was cool to hear people at Outdoor Retailer tell me how great I looked, I was fucking bored out of my mind. What did I have to look forward to back then? So as planned, in February, life became a lot more fun. I got back into my vices. And look where that's gotten me. Fast forward to now, and now I'm 180 pounds, and it's gotten to the point where I feel the extra weight when I get off the couch. So I've decided to add something to my regular regimen that I haven't done since my last knee surgery. Regular exercise. We have a Peloton bike, and for the past 2 weeks, I've been going on a ride in different cities each morning. And here's what I found out so far. 1, it's not that fun. 2, podcasts can make you help forget that you're even exercising. 3, I don't feel like as big a piece of shit as I used to when I exercise. 4, I may not be losing weight yet, but I'm not gaining it either. And 5, I really have to look like an idiot while I'm in my boxers and flip-flops on the Peloton bike. So I have a pair of shoes on order. When I think about the Peloton, it's considerate exercise. And what I mean by that is something that I'm sure everyone who's gone out on a walk recently has experienced. Runners. I hate them. I go on a walk every day with my family. We are always crossing the street and giving people their space. But almost every runner is a total asshole, calculatedly breathing hard and not giving anyone their space. And not only is what I'm doing for exercise considerate, it's safe. I'm riding a fake bike in my house, not on the streets. I feel like every road or commuter biker that I know has been hit by a car at least once. And while cars are the real assholes, these days, to me, it's runners who really suck. You know who else sucks? It's me. I'm the worst when it comes to putting women on the podcast. I've done about 171 podcasts, and about 90% of them have been men. I'm working hard to change this up. I have a really important and awesome woman on the show this week. She's a Paralympic gold medalist who's competed in 3 sports at 5 different Olympic Games. While her life has been filled with the thrill of victory and the agony of life-altering injury and loss, Elena Nichols has always persevered, and her story from able-bodied athlete to disabled champion and president of the Women's Sports Foundation is a roller coaster of emotions. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen to me and follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. Finally, I need to thank my sponsors as they truly make this show happen. Please support them. They are Evo, Stanley, 686, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk with Alana Nichols. So you recently were down in Dallas celebrating with Team Toyota, and I heard it was like a great party with a ton of Olympians, and everybody's so excited for the games. You're going to be commentating on NBC, and what happens a couple weeks later? What are your thoughts when you hear the games are going to be postponed?
Yeah, we could not have seen that coming. The way we were excited and the energy that we had down at Toyota HQ in Plano, it was definitely like a send-off party almost. Like we were pumped. And, a couple weeks later, coronavirus hits the US and couldn't imagine that the games would be postponed. There's only been like 3 other games in the history of the Olympics that have been canceled or postponed. So pretty mind-blowing experience. And I think a lot of the Olympic and Paralympic athletes were in shock at first, at least from the people I know and what I've seen on Facebook and Instagram and stuff. The athletes were all the way disappointed. And then I think as we've been able to embrace, another year of training, I really think that The athletes that are meant to succeed at those games are going to rise to the occasion and train even harder. And I think it actually will benefit them in the end.
Except for those who are going on their last Olympics, and every year is so precious to their body in terms of like, this is the last great year I have, and you have to push it
Right.
out another year.
Yeah, that. And, there's athletes that plan their lives around the games. And maybe there's female athletes that want to start a family and they have to push that back a year. Or there's a number of different situations that it definitely was pretty devastating for some people.
You've trained for the games many of times, and the time commitment that you put in, could you imagine hearing that you were not going to have the Olympics after you spent 4 years training your ass off?
Oh my God. Well, and I posted about that on Instagram. My last games, Rio, I was training in sprint kayaking. And that was one of the hardest experiences I've ever had just in general, because I'm not much of an endurance athlete. So those games couldn't have come any sooner. So if I would have had to push that off another year, I don't know. I would have just been so upset and just wanted to quit for sure. And I could imagine that's how some of the athletes are feeling.
I would hate to be in their shoes, but I guess is the plan for it to go on next summer?
Yeah, that's the idea. Postponed until 2021, possibly July. Same time for the Olympics. And then, as you know, the Paralympics are 2 weeks after the Olympic Games close. So those will kick off August 22nd of 2021.
Okay, well, that's a bummer, but that's all we're going to talk about the coronavirus in your life right now, because I think every
Good deal.
podcast I've done, I've been talking about the virus. I'm sure it'll come up again here and there, but we will start with your life and times, and it sounds like you were born in Farmington, New Mexico, a place that's famous for a mass UFO sighting in 1950. Have you ever seen a UFO?
New Mexico is just so weird. There's an endless amount of folklore and stories like that coming out of New Mexico. I've never seen a UFO, but there are these Native American mythical creatures called skinwalkers. I don't know if you've heard of those.
I've seen them in videos online, and they're quite entertaining.
Yeah, I think I saw one of those, but I don't know. You know how that is. You're just like, that was definitely it. And you're super freaked out. And then you're like, meh, I don't know.
Yeah, I've never seen any type of UFO, but speaking of something else that is a little weird, your name is spelled Alana, but pronounced Ulana, like UHLANEUH phonetically. How does that even happen?
Okay. I think you got that information from Roy, and it's actually Elena. Elena.
Elena.
Yeah. So my dad's middle name was Alan, and my mom wanted to carry on his name in some way, so she named me Alan with an A and said Elena, but spelt it looks like Alana or Alana, and nobody said my name correctly since I can remember. So that's nice.
Well, it's interesting that your mom wanted your dad's name to be part of yours because your dad was killed in a drunk driving accident when you're like 9 months old.
Mm-hmm.
Did they change your name at that point, or were you born with this name?
No, I was born with that name, and my mom couldn't have seen that coming, but I am honored to carry part of his name. His first name was David, which my brother was named after him as well. So it's a special thing for me. I didn't know my father. Obviously, I was only 9 months old.
Right.
Out of all my siblings, I'm one of four. I think I represent my dad the most, at least physically. And I don't know much about his personality, but I could imagine, because I'm not a whole lot like my mom.
Speaking of your mom, I would assume that if your dad passes away when you're 9 months old, you'd be raised by a single mother, but that's not the case. Your grandparents raised you in New Mexico. Where does your mom fit in the whole picture?
My mom had just had her third child, me, and my father passed away. And she did give it her best shot to raise all three of us after my dad passed, but it was just too much for her to handle. And I'm really actually so grateful looking back at the opportunity that I've had to be raised by my grandparents, because they gave us a lot of opportunity. They got me into sports when I was young, and that was one of the most important things that I would have to get through the rest of my life, even after breaking my back. So my mom is definitely still a part of our lives. She lives in New Mexico with my younger sister, and She always has been. I actually did live with her when I was younger as well, part-time. So she's a part of our lives. And, being older now and having my own child, I totally understand. Well, I could imagine now how she was feeling at that time with a brand new baby and her husband passing away. So I love her and I forgive her for all of that. And I feel for her now. I see the hand that she was dealt and how she played it. And life's tough.
Yeah. So your life, though, it wasn't like you were being raised by old people. They kept you involved like you were a regular kid with regular parents.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, my grandparents were in their late 50s and 60s when they got us. So they were definitely older and they were still pretty active and young. My grandpa would show up to every softball game and practice I had. And my grandma was there as well at everything I did. And I played 3 sports growing up. So they were busy.
So you're a basketball, volleyball, and softball, and then snowboarding is a big part of your life, too. How do you get into that?
Yeah, it was actually a friend of mine in junior high got me into snowboarding. My grandparents didn't obviously ski, but I was able to catch a ride up to the mountains and I borrowed a snowboard for the first couple of years and bought tickets. And then it was actually my first season pass was the year I broke my back. So I was sort of green, but I picked it up pretty well being an athlete. So I was pretty advanced even for somebody that was just buying tickets to go skiing up into that point.
But high school sports is what you're really all about at that point.
Yeah.
You really good at all the sports that you're playing? Are you like the best person on your teams?
Um, some of them, yeah. I mean, I remember in junior high, I was always second in sprints to one girl. Her name is April Ledesma. She was always faster than me. I was definitely in the top 3 in all my sports, and I played varsity when I was on the JV level. So I had potential. I was hoping to go to college on a softball scholarship, and I had offers at the time when I broke my back.
Are you a full-on jock in high school? Or are you a girly girl, too? What group do you fit in, and who are you then?
I just got along with everyone. I was friends with the nerds. I was watching Dawson Creek with the good girls, and I was hanging out with the bad girls, and I was playing sports and all the rest of it. So I was kind of a free range kid.
Okay, and the plan is you want to play softball at Arizona, and I think you have a scholarship offer for that. Senior year rolls around. It's November 2002. You're getting some early season riding in, and you're building jumps with your friends, and your goal is to land a backflip. And this day is the day you're going to try it. This is when your world changes. You over-rotate the backflip, which in most cases isn't a huge deal. But if there's a huge boulder where you're landing and you land back first onto that, it is a huge deal. Can you take us through the whole injury?
Yeah. So all of that's correct, except for it happened in 2000. So
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
no, you're good. And yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly what was happening. I was overly excited about trying my first backflip and over the summer had been practicing flat ground backflips and then on a trampoline and I felt like I could do it, but it was the first time I would attempt it on snow and without really giving it a lot of thought, I look over at my friend JC, who I'm still really good friends with to this day, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to try this backflip." And before he could say a word, I was already sliding down that hill. And as I'm approaching the jump, I think I don't want to under rotate this. So I throw my feet as hard as I can over my head. And like you said, over rotated the backflip. Did like a 1.5. My feet landed over my head and my back hit first on that boulder that was underneath the snow. And I don't know if you've ever heard somebody describe being paralyzed, but it's a lot like an electric sprung just kind of takes over your entire body. And it was actually like pretty loud, if you could imagine that. And because it was such a foreign feeling and sound and experience, I didn't actually know what happened. I laid there and my friends ran over and everything. And I asked my friend JC, who was at the top of the hill, where my board and my boots were. And he said they were on my feet. And that's when I put it together that I couldn't feel them, that I was paralyzed.
Are you in pain when you're on the ground?
It was more shocking than anything. I was conscious the whole time, but it was like so confusing. I didn't even cry, really. I was just really confused. And so it took me a while to put it together. And actually, I laid on the snow for about an hour and a half before we could get medical help. And
Whoa.
back in that day, we didn't have cell phones. So friends had to go get help. And then they flew a helicopter in and airlifted me out of there. But it wasn't until I actually got to the hospital, and this wasn't even a, rescue 911 situation. I wasn't dying. But for some reason, the helicopter medical staff forgot to take out my IV that was attached to the helicopter. So they ripped it out of my arm. And that's when everything just kind of hit the fan. And I was like, what the hell? And started crying and everything else. So it was kind of a bad scene. Blood everywhere.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And you get to the hospital, you go through x-ray and whatever else they need to get you through to tell you what's going on. And what's the news the doctor gives you?
I actually didn't talk to the doc until I think it was like day 2 in ICU.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I woke up and I'd been surrounded by my family, and we talked about it, that I had a spinal cord injury. But it wasn't until day 2 the doc came in, and he had a pretty serious heart to heart where he was like, okay, this is what a spinal cord injury is. You broke your back in 3 places, and the bone shards flew through your nerve that, runs your body.
Like shrapnel?
Yeah, shrapnel from T11. And some of those nerves were cut. Some of them were just damaged from the swelling. And he said that whatever you get back, whatever nerve connections actually heal, that's what you'll get for the rest of your life. And then he said, I've seen a lot of spinal cord injuries, and I don't think you'll ever walk again.
How do you take that news? Is it eyes closed, head down? Do you need time to be alone? How do you process that, being an athlete, and that's what your whole life revolves around?
I love that you just asked that, because I didn't believe it for a second. I was like, okay, well, you're an educated person. I respect that, but you don't know me, and you don't know that everything up until this point in my life, I've been able to accomplish if I work hard enough, and that's what I'm going to do. And so I wasn't like heartbroken and devastated when we had that talk. It happened about 2 years later, because that's what the doctor said, whatever you get back within 2 years is what you will have. And so I really held out hope for those 2 years, and I worked my ass off. I mean, I dedicated every waking minute to walking again. And I went to rehab, and I got long leg braces, and I started going from my bedroom to the kitchen on those braces, and then bedroom to the living room, and then bedroom to the front door, and then bedroom down the ramp at the front door. And then one day I walked all the way to the stop sign and back, which took like 45 minutes. And then I walked around the block. I had goals, and as an athlete, I knew that if I just kept working, I could accomplish them. And then it was like pretty much 2 years to the day of my accident that I was in college at the University of New Mexico, and it all just kind of hit. I just realized it's not getting better. I'm not making progress, and this is my life. I'm in a wheelchair.
Well, what progress do you actually make, though? So when you get injured, are you paralyzed from the waist down, and then some stuff comes back where eventually you get some movement like above the knee? Does anything get better from the time you have surgery on?
Yeah, you know what? When I was in the hospital, I was originally paralyzed from the belly button down. I couldn't feel anything.
Oh, wow.
And then in the first week, I got feeling down to my left knee and the middle of my thigh on the right leg. And I thought, okay, I'm seeing some progress.
You got to be psyched.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I thought at one point that I could feel my toes, which was weird, because like you can't really imagine this feeling, but like my legs were asleep. I knew where they were, and I could like wiggle my toes, but they weren't moving on the outside. And so I was making progress, and it was basically the swelling was going down in my spinal cord that was allowing those nerves to heal. But the nerves that were cut, they didn't reconnect, and that's why I didn't end up walking again.
Okay. And, I've talked to some guys who have had life-altering injuries like this, and there are some things that I wouldn't even think of that are part of their everyday lives. Like some guys have to catheterize themselves when they take a pee, which sounds absolutely terrible. And how does that work for a woman?
for most people that are paralyzed, their bowel and bladder function is also paralyzed. And so I catheterize as well. It's not painful for me now. It was at the beginning, but for not to be crude, but you push a plastic straw into your urethra enough times, it just doesn't hurt anymore.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of the case for men as well. But I'd have to say it's easier for a dude because it's more accessible.
You
I
have a
have to get
guide?
onto a toilet. Yeah.
Now it is time for me to take my first sponsor break. And my first sponsor is Evo. And while Evo's retail locations are closed for distancing, don't worry. If you haven't been to evo.com lately, you are missing out on the best deals on the internet. Evo is the first website to focus on the digital space in action sports, and they do it better than anyone else. They have all the brands, all the products, and the resources and customer service to make sure you get what you need. If that's not enough, Evo offers free shipping on orders over $50, a low price guarantee, and a hassle-free return policy. And I have a special deal for you. Shop for any Evo branded product that is as good or better than the big brand stuff, and when you check out, use the code POWEL20 and you will save 20% on your entire order. Evo gives a percentage of sales back to local charities, and right now, that is more important than ever. My next sponsor is 686. They have been the independent outerwear brand in snow since 1992, and they make the best gear on the planet. That's no bullshit. My 686 Glacier Jacket is the best jacket I've ever owned, and it comes with a lifetime guarantee. The whole Glacier series does. And since 686 sent me a pair of Everywhere pants, I've lived in them. They are so comfortable. And the latest product they sent me, the all-new Everywhere shirt, is just as comfortable as the Everywhere pant because it uses the same 4-way stretch material. And like all 686 products, there's so much attention paid to the pockets, the styling, and the fit. Like the pants, the Everywhere shirt will sell out, so head on over to 686.com and grab yourself one. Those are some of my great sponsors. Now, let's jump back into the podcast. Every part of your life where nowadays, like I've seen you, you make everything look easy, but it's not. There's always another level in your life compared to an able-bodied person. What are the things that are really difficult that you have to get used to?
Everything, I would say at the beginning, it's a lot like being reborn. I had to learn how to sit up. I had to learn how to dress myself. I had to learn how to move from the bed to my wheelchair, to the wheelchair, to the toilet. All these little minute things that you would never even think about. I had to relearn.
Yeah.
And then once I accomplished all of those physical tasks, I think one of the hardest things was really to kind of re-embrace who I was as a woman, my sexuality, my personality. I lost a lot of who I was as an athlete. And I went on to college and I didn't know who I was, and nobody else did either, because they didn't know me as a walking person, that I was just walking like within the same year. So people would look at me, especially guys, like I used to, like every 17-year-old, guys would look me in the face and then they'd look at my boobs and then they'd look at my body. And that's just how it went. And then as an 18-year-old now in a wheelchair, guys would look at my face and look at my wheelchair and look away. And that was like so painful for me. And I didn't really love who I was either. And so it was just a whole, perfect cocktail of bad feelings and low self-worth and loss of identity. And so right around when I realized I wasn't going to walk again, that was when I really hit my lowest point, and I really didn't want to live at one point. I didn't have any real purpose. I was in college. I had to go to algebra. That was like the last thing I wanted to do. So I kind of drudged along, and then it was honestly right at that time when I came across wheelchair basketball. And it was like this, I call it a God moment, because it was really so orchestrated at that time in my life. I needed it more than ever. And I just happened to be rolling through the gym at the University of New Mexico. My head's down, I'm bummed out, and I see this whole team of people playing ball, and they're all in wheelchairs. And honestly, I was the only person that I saw on a daily basis that had a disability. And I was certainly the only one I knew of that was young and in college at that time. And so for me to see a whole team of people playing, and if you've ever seen wheelchair basketball, it's like
It's
this
gnarly.
really intense. Yeah, it's violent. People are smashing into each other and falling
Murder
over.
ball.
Yeah.
But that's rugby, right?
Well, that's what rugby's called, but there's an equal amount of contact in wheelchair basketball too. You're just not trying to murder the person with the ball.
Okay.
Is the difference. But you know what? I saw it and I needed to see it to believe it and know that it was legitimate and challenging and athletic. And when I saw this person with no legs, I'll never forget it. He's like kind of a bigger dude and he just didn't have any legs. I think he was born with his disability.
Okay.
And he was just draining three balls, like from a NBA 3-point line sitting. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. And I knew that all those people with their own disabilities had to deal with what I was dealing with. And they all embraced it. They all decided to do the best they could with it. And then they were actually really good at basketball. And I thought, you know what? I don't have any excuses now. I can do that too. That was a pivotal time in my life.
You found fun again where you didn't have that before. But I mean, it sounds like
Yeah.
you get through the injury and you're a high school student, which is so young. And I would think when you come back to school, if you get back to school from the injury, all your friends there, they're looking at you and feeling sorry for you almost because you have to live like this.
Right.
Then you go to college and then it's a whole new life and no one knows your frame of reference that you were a badass. So they just look at you as the disabled person and that has to feel like shit. In your dark days, is there drugs, alcohol, anything like that, or is it just sadness?
There was a lot of weed. There was a lot of alcohol. And I look back at that time and it wasn't so much stemming from like an addictive place, but like most people, I was drinking just so I didn't have to feel. I didn't want to feel any of it, but I also like, if I was going to go into a bar in college in a wheelchair, there's no way I was going to do that sober. I needed some liquid courage and I just wanted to have a good time like any other person. And there was no way that I could do that with the reality I was in.
So then you have your aha moment, your God moment, where you find basketball and that's where your world changes. How long after you see it do you actually get into wheelchair basketball?
It was that day.
Whoa.
One of the girls on the team, she came over to me and she's like, wow, you look athletic. And I was like, oh, it was like the first time anybody said that to me. Before that, I'm sure they thought, wow, you're disabled. She looked at me like an athlete and she let me try her basketball chair, which is different than an everyday wheelchair. It's got straps on it and slanted wheels. And I got into her chair and immediately I felt so much more agile and athletic, and you can bend at the waist and just push the whole length of the rim on the wheel. And I ran the equivalent of running. I ran for the first time in 2 years. And like you said, I had fun. Like I was breathing hard. My heart rate got up and every positive byproduct of working out, I finally got that again. I felt good again. From there, I mean, I went to wheelchair basketball practice every Wednesday night. It was just a community team, but it was more than just basketball. I mean, I've finally had a reason to get out of bed and go do something fun again.
That's awesome. And you get fully into it and you hear about a program at the University of Arizona, transfer there. And is it much more of a big deal at Arizona, the whole program there?
Well, at the time, it was one of the only all women's programs. So, I had that dream of playing collegiate sports, and it was not a varsity sponsored sport, but it was held to the same standards of an NCAA sport. So we were up at 5 a.m. for morning practice and then back at 3 for afternoon. And it was a lot of hard work. We didn't touch a basketball for the first 3 weeks of practice. We just worked on chair skills. And that's like the most insane amount of work that you can do in a wheelchair, like sprints, suicides, power stop and starts. There's all these different things you can do to really hone your skills in the chair. And then finally our coach gave us a ball, and then we started working on the team aspects, but also shooting and things like that. So I remember my first week of training, I had blisters all over my hands, in between my fingers, and my wrists were like sprained, but I had never impacted them. I was just like so sore, and I loved it. I'll never forget, I was taking a shower and my hands were burning so bad from all the blisters, and I was just like, yes.
It's just like you're back.
Yep. I needed that.
So you start kicking ass in that through college. You graduate from Arizona in 2006, and I think by this time you were recruited to play with the U.S. Paralympic team. And I would say the rest is history, but there's so much more to your story. First, how does the whole thing start? How do you get on the Paralympic team? Do they recruit you? Do you have a tryout? How does that whole thing come together?
Yeah, so it was actually my first year at Arizona. I was given the opportunity to try out for the US Paralympic team in what would have been their last open invitation. So it was really lucky for me that anybody could try out, and then they would pull 12 athletes. I think there was at least 50 to 60 athletes trying out.
Okay.
And I got chosen to be one of those 12 that were training for the Athens Games in 2004. I was an alternate on that team, so I didn't go to the games, but I trained with the Paralympic team from 2004 on. And that was one of the more pivotal things that happened in my story, because if I wouldn't have made that team, I wouldn't have trained for 5 years going into Beijing. I don't know that I would have gone to Beijing. And yeah, I graduated from Arizona and was recruited to play at the University of Alabama for my master's degree. So I finished up my education and trained for Beijing at the same time. And I actually had like one of the more epic summers of my life, because I graduated with my master's, like finally finished school. And we went on to Beijing and won the gold medal later that summer. And it was just like, it couldn't have gotten better for me at that point.
No, it sounds like a pretty dream. I mean, not a dream life, because you've had some definite tragedy in there, but it sounds like you've made things work out so far. And the Olympics could be a whole podcast, but we'll just say you won the gold. And what was the highlight of your first Olympic Games?
There were so many, but imagine I've never even traveled out of the country, and I'm in China. And we're in the Bird's Nest. I don't know if you remember those games, but this amazing structure. We're there for opening ceremonies, and there were just like these Chinese actors like flying through the air, and you know how elaborate that opening ceremonies was.
Yeah.
It was just like a dream. Like I really didn't know if I was awake or dreaming at that point. And that was just the beginning. We went on to play in pool play and the crossover in the semi and the final, and we didn't lose a game. So there was that. That was pretty epic. And then, you know, winning the gold was, it's really hard to explain, because every Olympic or Paralympic athlete has their journey. But, you know, for me, after breaking my back and then 8 years later, finding myself again as a para athlete and then winning the gold, like I couldn't believe that I was so fortunate. You know, there's 1% in the world of people get to win a gold medal.
Yeah.
And I got to be that person along with 11 other athletes on the team. And I just remember bending over to get that gold put around my neck, and I was crying. Everyone was, but I was thinking about how I just, you know, I was laying in that hospital bed thinking my athletic days were over, and I couldn't have imagined they were just beginning.
And I would think that any disabled athlete getting a gold medal, if they weren't born disabled, if something happened, that would be their thought when they're getting that gold medal, thinking of their journey. Like it's a no-brainer. You think of everything being taken away and then you getting it all back.
Exactly. That was well put. Yep, that's it. And it's unbelievable.
Around this time, around the '08 games, you decide you're going to learn how to ski. But you weren't just going to learn how to sit ski. You were going to learn how to sit ski with the goal of getting an Olympic gold medal. Is that how you approach everything? Like, I'm not just going to be good, I'm going to be the best?
I mean, yeah, it's kind of a natural thing for me. I'm not just going for the silver.
I mean, because it's crazy, because 99% of the people in the world could never learn how to sit ski in 2 years and make an Olympic team. I think everybody must think you're crazy.
Yeah, you know what though? That was one of the more outrageous and ridiculous dreams I've ever had, but looking back at it, I would have never done that had I not dreamt that big in that moment. And I remember sitting down with the head coach of the National Sports Center for the Disabled, the ski program I was a part of. I told him my plan, and it was right before the Beijing Games when I met with him. I told him I wanted to go on to Beijing with the small amount of money that we win for our gold.
What do you get?
We got 5,000 at the time. We didn't have equal pay.
Equal pay to the able-bodied or equal pay to the men?
Equal pay to the able-bodied. So we were missing probably 3 zeros on the end of that.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like pocket change. And of course, I didn't have any endorsements at the time either. So I told him I wanted to take that $5,000 and put it towards his program, which that first season, it added up to about $20,000. So I needed some extra cash, which I mentioned I was just graduating college. I didn't have a job. That's when my community back in Farmington, New Mexico came through for me. They threw me a fundraiser and we raised the money I needed for those first 2 seasons so I could compete. It was like a Cinderella story. I had this big, ridiculous dream and it all came true. And I don't even really know how that works, but I believed in it.
Well, it'd be a Cinderella story with Cinderella along the way getting her body beaten and battered over and over. I've seen some of your early sit ski races, and it was not pretty. It was some of the harder crashes I've ever seen. Was there ever a point where you're like, I don't know if this Olympic thing is going to happen?
Yeah, thanks for knowing that, Mike, because a lot of people, I tell them, I've been clocked going 70 miles per hour down a mountain, and I don't think people understand what that actually means. And there was a lot of crashing. And as a sit skier, I mean, you have 3 options: left shoulder, right shoulder, or your face.
Yeah.
I definitely fell on all 3 of those multiple times and tumbled head over heels multiple times. And there were definitely days when I was like, I don't know, and of course my mom was like, are you serious? You're really going to go faster now on snow than you did when you broke your back? So it was a hard sell.
Well, those crashes too, it's like there was nothing to stop your momentum until you stopped, it seemed like. So if you were on your face, you were just riding it out on your face until you could kind of get over to a shoulder. It was some really, really painful stuff, it looked like.
Yeah, monoskiing is one of the hardest things I've ever had to learn. And it's the learning part that's the hardest. Once you get it, it's actually really graceful and easy. You're just kind of sitting there. But I coach sit skiing now for people that are learning and new injuries. And I always have to stress to them, look, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's painful. It's hard. You fall upside down into tree wells and you can't get out. There's so many things that you have to get through to be good at it. But once you are good at it, it's totally worth it.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about another painful thing that I don't even want to bring up, but it's part of your story, so I have to. I think the year's 2009, and you lose your brother. He's murdered, and I'm very sorry to even say that.
Thank you. Yeah.
But you're on a high in life until that. I mean, things are all coming together to you. What does that loss do to you? Does it pull you right down into the toilet again?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't think there was anything worse than breaking my back. I didn't think I would ever have to go through anything worse than that. But I was actually really in control of everything that happened when I broke my back and when I became paralyzed. And I think it was harder for my family, especially my mom, to go through me getting paralyzed. And the reason I say that is because when my brother was murdered, he was a victim of gun violence. And because it wasn't me, I mean, I lost that along with my family. It was way more painful. I would rather break my back 20 times over than go through that and had to have lost my brother. And I was really like living a dream when my brother died. I was on the path to Vancouver in 2010. I was skiing every day. It was going great. And then, my brother suddenly gets killed and it brought me back all the way to the ground. Like I hit rock bottom. I didn't want to live again. I didn't want to ski. I didn't want to do anything. And what really happened is I had to come face to face with my brother, who was my biggest fan. And I knew in my heart of hearts that he wanted me to keep going. He wanted me to compete. He was so stoked every time I won something or anytime I was competing. There was no denying that that was what he would have wanted for me. And reluctantly, I didn't want to keep going, but I knew I had to for him. And the way that things played out in Vancouver, it was really undeniable to me that, like, I was just shown favor. Like, I think God was like, you had your heart broken so many times. I felt blessed by my experience there. And then, two, my brother was undeniably a part of the first gold I won in Vancouver.
That footage is so powerful. When you're in the finish corral, it is incredible to watch.
It was not a cute little cry.
No.
It was like, my brother is here right now kind of cry. And that was, to this day, I mean, besides the birth of my son, was the most powerful moment of my life.
Now it is time for my final sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Stanley, the brand that has been a leader in keeping things hot and cold for over 100 years. They invented the vacuum bottle, and you've seen it so many times in your life. You know, that green bottle that kept your grandpa and your dad's coffee hot all day long? Well, Stanley still makes a bottle like that, and they work better than whatever you're using right now. The reason Stanley is the leader in hot and cold is because their product is better. I mean, they created the category and they keep innovating. But Stanley makes so much more than that iconic bottle. I personally use the water bottles and pint glasses daily, and my drinks stay hotter or colder than yours by at least an hour. You deserve that same quality. Now you can get 30% off all Stanley products by heading to their site, stanley-pmi.com, entering the code Powell and the number 30, all one word, and boom, it's that easy. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery, and they have been brewing beer out of Bend, Oregon since 2006. And since they started brewing beer, they are committed to skiing, snowboarding, biking, and drinking beer outside. While I see a lot of copycat brands out there lately trying to mimic what 10 Barrel is doing in the outdoor space, no one puts their money where their mouth is like 10 Barrel. This year, they produced both a ski and a snowboard movie. The ski movie is Watch This, featuring Lucas Walks, and then they have Hold My Beer, a snowboard movie featuring Curtis Cizik. They had a whole lot more planned for winter, but with the quarantine, everything has been put on hold event-wise. The good news is that even with all that we're going through, you can still drink beer outside. Next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Profuse Juice, a hazy IPA that I'm loving right now, and a beer that gives 1% of sales back to the Surfrider Foundation. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. It's in the Vancouver Olympics, your first gold medal, and it is a really powerful moment. In that Olympics, you win 4 medals in 5 events.
Yep.
You're the first woman to win both gold in summer and winter games. You've come a long way from the awkward freshman at New Mexico. And how much time do you get to take off before you start training for the Olympics in London in basketball?
It wasn't much. Right after Vancouver was the first season I would do both sports. And that proved to be the most challenging athletic experience because while I was skiing, I was obviously really worried and sort of focused on trying to not get hurt for basketball, which was what I was really training for. And like I said, we fall on our shoulders all the time, and my upper body is gold for what I was doing in basketball. So it really challenged me mentally to not focus on getting injured, because in ski racing, if you think about crashing, you kind of manifest it.
Yeah.
And so it was really difficult. But I will say, training for both at the same time, I was in the best shape of my life. So I was physically fit more than ever and was really effective as a basketball player. And thankfully, I didn't get injured going into the London games. I did, however, break my shoulder right after those games.
Before we talk about that, you go to London and you get your first taste of defeat. And I say that because you don't make the podium. And is there a reason for that other than the competition being better? Or, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because London was devastating, and not because we weren't prepared. We actually went into those games in the same position we were in Beijing, undefeated, favored. prepared and certainly had all of the athletes we needed to win another gold. We ended up playing the Australians in the semifinal, just like we did in Beijing. If we would have won that game, we would have played the Germans for the gold, which is how it played out in Beijing. And so we get down to the last quarter of the semifinal game against Australia. We are down by 1 point, and there's probably 9 seconds on the clock. I know this exactly, and it's actually on YouTube. It's called Paralympic Mistake.
Oh.
So you'll have to watch it. So there's 9 seconds on the clock. We have the ball at half, and we're down by 1. We pass the ball in. Our athletes are all over the place. Like, our big girl is passing in the ball, which shouldn't have been the case, but we were a little frantic. We get the ball into the paint to our youngest athlete on the court. She's 16. Her name is Rosie. She shoots the ball and gets fouled, but they don't call it. It bounces off the back of the rim, but doesn't reset the shot clock. And it bounces off the back of the rim into my hands. I make it before the game clock goes out, but the shot clock buzzed in the middle. And the referee wasn't paying attention. He calls a shot clock violation, which it didn't reset. And my coach, at the same time, if you watch the video, throws his head back because he thinks we lost the game when Rosie missed the shot. He didn't see me make the shot. So in international basketball, an athlete on the court cannot call a timeout. And so after I made the shot, there was still 2 seconds on the game clock. And I look around at the ref and I'm like, that counted, stop. Like, that was my moment of glory. Like,
Yeah.
I just saved the game. Like, that was probably the most epic shot of my career. And the ref passes the ball to the Australians at the baseline. They pass the ball in, the game clock buzzes, and the game's over. And we were just all in such shock.
Just stunned.
We were like, wait, what just happened? And at that point, we couldn't have done anything about it. We received a formal apology from the referee and the head of the International Wheelchair Basketball Federation. It was just like unbelievable. And so we had to go on to play for the bronze against the Dutch. We've never lost to the Dutch at this point. We ended up losing by 24 points.
Whoa. You guys are just over it?
Our hearts were like broken. We were so devastated. And we got fourth. And we were just like, what just happened?
And that's the end of the basketball chapter.
Yep.
The next big thing that happens in your life should be a fun thing. You go to Mount Hood and you go skiing, and skiing in the summer, or skiing at Hood a lot, is a ton of fun. And I've scared myself a lot there because when you ski near the rocks kind of heat up the snow within 2 feet of the rocks. It gets a little bit slushier. Skis will catch up there. And it sounds like you might have had a similar experience where you kind of got hooked up next to the rocks and tumbling into the rocks.
That's exactly what happened. Like, casual warm-up run, which as a ski racer, of course, I was kind of slaying, like laying it over and just really angulating and trying to get loose.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get off of my right edge. I skied directly into a boulder field. And luckily, I was paralyzed in a monoski because I hit feet first. I broke both of my ankles, but then I caught my right shoulder as I put my arm up to block my face.
Yep.
And I dislocated my right shoulder backwards, which is like the worst possible thing.
It's like a leg for you.
It's like breaking your leg backwards. Yeah. And it was out of place for 2 hours.
Oh.
And I can't even describe the amount of pain I was in. It was unbearable.
Do you even feel the ankles?
No. The ankles were like, whatever. So they put my shoulder back into place. At this point in time, I'm actually living at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. So they put me up in the hospital in Portland, and then they shipped me back to the Olympic Training Center. And I have a full shoulder reconstruction surgery. And now I'm just down to one limb.
And your arms are your legs. I mean, that's how you move places. So is life just totally changed again, and you're just hoping to get motion back with your shoulder?
Yeah, I didn't really know what I was in for, but I couldn't be more grateful for the fact that I was living at the Olympic Training Center, because a shoulder injury like I had, if you don't have treatment, like manual therapy, done on your shoulder every day, you're going to lose a significant amount of range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I went to treatment 7 days a week and they did everything. I mean, dry needling, stem, soft tissue manipulation. They were externally rotating my shoulder the day after I had surgery. And I thought for sure those ladies lost their minds. I was like, you guys are kidding me. It was so painful. But if you don't start moving it, you'll get frozen shoulder. And then that's the end of like not only my athletic career, but like my life.
Mobility.
Yeah, I wouldn't reach anything overhead.
Well, how long does it take you to get back to your old self?
Well, that happened in June of 2013. I was training for Sochi, which would have been March of 2014. I was back on snow that fall, not nearly 100%, but was able to ski.
Were you skiing scared?
I was definitely skiing scared. The first day on snow, I was terrified. I did not want to fall on it. I was still in a lot of pain. Like the shoulder injury was so painful, not to mention the withdrawal from Oxycontin, which was a whole nother story. For athletes with major injuries, I mean, you have to control the pain.
Yeah.
But when your brain connects with this chemical and then you take the chemical out of the equation, it's a terrible experience.
Supposedly, it's like a big problem in this country.
Yeah, it's a real big problem. And it's so easy to get addicted, to be dependent on this drug. And then for me, I didn't really know that I was addicted to it. So I just quit cold turkey. I had withdrawal symptoms for 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks was just like the longest 2 weeks of my life.
Is it kind of like you've got COVID-19 for 2 weeks?
I think I could imagine. I mean, I wanted to tear my own face off. It was terrible. So all of that was said and done. I get back on snow. I was skiing scared, and I'm an older skier at this point. I'm going into my second games, and I just wasn't quite as young and fearless, for good reason.
At the first games that you went to, you were like an unknown. People, they had
Right.
probably heard of you, but like no one expected you to win 4 medals by any means. But when you go into Vancouver, everybody expects a lot out of you because you've just been crushing everything that you do. And the
Right.
games start out really good for you. You get a silver in the downhill. You're the favorite for the Super G, and then you veer off the course and there's another terrible crash. I don't know if you're airlifted off, but you're taken off the mountain. And what happens in that one?
Yeah, I was airlifted to the Russian hospital.
That's
which
scary.
I don't know if you remember all of the media around that.
Yeah, I do.
But yeah, it was so interesting. I ended up getting 6 stitches in my chin, and I spent the night at the hospital and just had the most bizarre experience. Like from the very minute I showed up to the very end when I checked myself out, I was just like, I'm out of here. They don't do oral medication, so I had to get a shot of painkiller in my butt. And if you've ever seen the show Orange is the New Black,
Here and there.
yeah, the cook on that show, her name is Red. That was my nurse, and she was scary. And yeah, my sister stayed the night with me, and my older sister slept on a gurney. It was just all really bizarre. But I ended up taking 3 days with my concussion, taking 3 days off. And I went back to ski in the giant slalom. It was the last race of the games. Skied with 6 stitches in my face and was just hoping to kind of redeem myself. And definitely had the potential, but I ended up getting 4th in that race. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. I was devastated. I cried. I was just like, this is such a disaster. After all of that, I still didn't do what I wanted to. And I think that had a lot to do with my expectations. Like you said, I was favored to win. I had endorsements. I was working with Visa, Nike, AT&T. I had a lot of different pressure on me, and I think it all just kind of crashed down on me after I lost that last race.
This is around the time you moved from Colorado to San Diego. And
Mhm.
is the reason just your passion for surfing?
Yeah, so I ended up going to Hawaii after Sochi. I learned how to surf. There's a program called Access Surf out there that a friend of mine told me about. I caught my first wave and was like, you know what I'm going to do? Quit all of these sports and go surf. Like basketball sucks, skiing sucks. No, I didn't have that bad of an attitude about it, but I knew like naturally it was time for me to transition. And I really wanted to because I love to surf. So I basically moved my whole life out to San Diego, and I was kind of scheming a little bit on how to stay employed with the Paralympic Committee, and was like, sprint kayak is a new sport in the games, and it requires a lot of paddling, which I want to be really good at to be a really good surfer, and put two and two together and decided I wanted to go for my third sport, my sixth Paralympic Games.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it was,
I mean, it's just crazy for someone to pick up a sport like skiing and in 2 years make the Olympic team, then say, I'm just going to pick up this other sport that I haven't done in the opposite season and try to make it the Olympics in 2 years as well.
Yeah, and it didn't quite work out like the other games did, and was another little slice of humble pie for me. I really needed probably about 10 years of sprint kayaking to medal in that sport, and I had 2. So I was lucky to make the games. There was a lot of kind of controversy around Rio as well with Zika virus.
And the water.
The water was terrible.
Was that a big concern for you going in?
It was. I mean, I was nearing the end of my athletic career. I knew I wanted to start a family, and Zika virus is definitely scary for that.
I mean, small heads, though, make cute babies.
That's true. They're all cute, small head or not. But no, that was definitely a consideration. And in the end, I was like, I'm going to follow through with what I started. And I ended up 7th in the Rio Games. And honestly, I celebrated my 7th place like I won the gold, because the amount of work that it took to get there. Sprint kayaking, like I said, I'm not an endurance sport athlete. So just the grind, and I always thought it was going to get better, like that runner's high people talk about, where you kind of hit your stride and it doesn't hurt as much. It never happened for me. It was always a struggle.
Cool. Well, that's the end of your real Olympic career, and we're not going to talk too much about surfing at all, but it should be noted that in 2018, you won, I think, the ISA World Adaptive Surf Championships. And the cool thing about that was there wasn't enough women to have their own championships, so they put the men and women together, and you won the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is that something that you're really, really proud of? Does it matter that the men were involved?
No, that was a highlight for sure. And, with surfing, it's, I guess, very conditional. The waves need to be there. You need to have the right wave choice and the flow to perform to the maximum in a 20-minute heat. So it all came together for me. I felt really fortunate, but also I was damn proud of that, because those guys taught me how to surf, and for me to surpass them on that given day felt really good.
And now you're at the first big business chapter of your life, I feel like. I mean, while you've always had sponsorships and been doing things, you are now the president of the Women's Sports Foundation, and this is a foundation started by Billie Jean King. And what is your role with this foundation? I mean, what do you actually do?
Yeah, so Billie Jean King, as you know, is an icon, and she's really the champion of women's equality. So we are on her mission. We are carrying it out to continue fighting for equality in women's sports in all areas. So equal pay, equal exposure, representation, equal opportunities for young girls and women as well. And a lot of what we do is advocate for Title IX, which in this country is still not being adhered to as it should be. So more recently, we just distributed a piece of research called the Equity Report, which basically is a landscape view of what's going on in women's sports, why we still don't have equality, and what we need to do to change that. As the president, I do a lot of ambassador work, so I speak on behalf of the organization. About a month ago, we went out to DC. We lobbied on Capitol Hill and talked to senators about a couple of pieces of legislation that relate directly to women's equality in sports. And outside of that, I run the Athlete Advisory Panel, which is a group of really amazing, talented athletes that Olympic, professional, athletes that are all friends of the foundation that want to continue their mission. And we basically put our heads together on what we can do on a quarterly basis as individuals and together as a team. So it's pretty amazing work. It's always been an honor for the last 6 years to be on the board of the Women's Sports Foundation. Just sitting at a table with Billie Jean and talking about what she thinks needs to happen is like a dream come true. But
Yeah.
then to be a part of the movement and the president of the organization is a huge honor.
And when you look at the sports landscape in general, equality is not there. You've said that. But I'm sure there's pockets where it's better. Are there some sports that are doing it right and some that just aren't?
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress over the years. As you know, the women's soccer team has fought tooth and nail for equal pay,
Mm-hmm.
and they're really setting the bar for the rest of the sports. There are tennis players that received in the millions of dollars for prize money now, female tennis players. So, we are seeing a lot of change, but the conversation I had with Billie Jean the other day, she's so inspirational. She's got this big picture vision and she won't let it die. And she wants young girls and women to be able to have a dream of playing professional sports. And she wants women's football. She wants women's baseball. She wants women's soccer to be paid equally and have equal representation in the media. The WNBA needs to have locker rooms with showers and all of the same assets that the men's teams have. And so the way that she talks about it, she's not happy with the crumbs. She's not going to settle for anything less than equal. And it's so inspiring.
That's pretty cool to be able to work with a person like that.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, well, I could get into talking about your beautiful son, Gunnar, or your wonderful partner, Roy Tuscany, and what a challenge it is having a child when both of you are not able-bodied. We aren't going to discuss that. That would be a whole nother podcast. We are going to talk to Roy, though, and for those of you that don't know, Roy Tuscany is the founder of the High Fives Foundation, and while no one gives high fives anymore because of coronavirus, the foundation is doing some amazing work over there. I took Roy away from the foundation for a couple minutes to ask you some inappropriate questions. I'm going to cue them up because my last segment of the show is called Inappropriate Questions, and we will get to your partner, Roy, in just 1 second.
Okay.
All right, question number 1. You have a group of friends that you call the trio, the triangle, the Fantastic Three. What is the rowdiest thing the three of you have ever done together? And you know who I'm talking about.
Roy's trying to throw me under the bus right now.
That's what this segment's all about.
So we call ourselves the trifecta, and it's myself and 2 girls I went to high school with, Ashley and Sarah. And I think the rowdiest thing that we've ever done, oh man, there's kind of a slew of things to pick from. Okay, so we all went out to the Kentucky Derby 2 years ago.
Okay.
It was debauchery for, solid 3 days. And then there was one other friend that was at the Kentucky Derby with us. After that weekend, we all ended up having baby boys. So I don't know if it was in the bourbon or what, but that was our last hurrah. That was our send-off into motherhood.
So you all had a good weekend after that, is what you're saying.
We had a great weekend, and it will go down in history for us, for sure.
Yes, you can never forget that for the rest of your lives because you have something to show for it.
Exactly.
All right, let's go with question number 2.
All right, question number 2. Before giving birth to Gunnar, how often did you smell butts? Because that seems to be like the number one thing that you and I do now is always checking to see if Gunnar has had a poop.
Oh my God. I didn't actually smell butts before I had a baby. So now it's kind of a thing.
I'm just trying to think of how we spin that into a real inappropriate question because I know you didn't smell butts. And if you did, it's probably not something you would admit because it's kind of one of those weird things that you keep in the closet. But has Gunnar peed or pooped on you?
I have been peed and pooped on. I got splatter pooped on once.
Has Roy ever peed or pooped on you?
He has not.
Okay. Not in the shower or anything?
Nope.
Okay.
I, however, may have peed on Roy once or twice.
All right, so that's how we make that question inappropriate. I like to hear that. We will now go with our final inappropriate question.
And the final inappropriate question, can you do a wheelie?
That's not that inappropriate. Yes, it is actually, because more often than not, when I meet somebody and they see that I'm in a wheelchair, that's like their first question. And it's so ridiculous that it is inappropriate. And so I'm just going to say, no, I can't. How about that?
All right, well, I can do a wheelie in one and you can't? That's crazy.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that is the podcast. I want to thank you for your time. I know you've got a baby sleeping that you need to get to, and your story is such a crazy one. There's so many peaks and valleys in it, and you're in an awesome place and things are great for you right now, but it's a lot of inner strength to be able to deal with all the shit you had to deal with. And then like your athletic ability and your tenacity to be able to make these Olympic teams over and over in sports that you don't even know what you're doing when you start is pretty amazing. And thank you for telling us the whole story. And that is it.
Yeah, Mike, thank you for knowing the story, for asking the right questions, and for telling it, for helping me tell it. Appreciate you.
So that was time with Elena Nichols. And what a heavy story. I mean, I can't imagine having to process and accept not being able to walk at 17. It's like you have 17 years of thinking you are bulletproof and badass, and then it's all taken away from you in one shot. I've thought about what I would do in this situation before, and I don't know if I'd want to live. If I put myself in Elena's shoes and I didn't have a kid, I'm not so sure I'd be here. And it sounds like Elena had those same thoughts too. I bet a lot of people who suffer a life-altering injury do, and then I'm guessing most people eventually come to their senses and make the best of it. And for Elena, making the best of it put her on a stage that might not have been attainable for her if she were able-bodied. Who knows? Stories like this one are the reason that people say when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And the lemons Elena was given, well, she made some of the best lemonade in the world. That's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening. I want to ask you to tell your friends about the show and email me with any questions or concerns you have. My email is mike@thepowellmovement, and I will get back to you. Finally, I want to thank my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Evo, Stanley, 686, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Please be safe and have a great week, everyone.